has given us this work to do, and so we do not become discouraged. We put aside all secret and shameful deeds. We do not act with deceit, nor do we falsify the word of God. In the full light of truth, we live in God's sight and try to commend ourselves to everyone's good conscience. It is easy to become discouraged when our best efforts are not appreciated, our successes are not applauded, or our ideas given serious consideration. We all know that leadership can be lonely, as you take the heat for decisions as peers or subordinates. God has given each one of us work to do, and you are here for such a time as this. Be encouraged to do your best using your special gifts and talents wherever you serve. And this is true for all of us in the nation. If we are not yet working, we can volunteer. If we are underemployed, we can make an effort to be retrained in an area of greater need. If we are working and enjoy what we do, we may be able to offer a part-time or full-time job to someone else or create an apprenticeship program. Let us make good use of the time that we have, trusting that better will come. To exemplify goodness, we have to intentionally put aside all secret and shameful deeds and not act with deceit. This has to become a national standard. Let us become known internationally as offering good service, operating with good character, and to be known at home in the Bahamas that we all act in the best interest of our people. We have to all be honorable in every sphere of our lives. I pray that goodness will become a new norm, that the fad of being bad, in inverted commas, will be replaced with the desire for decency. Let our role models be persons of integrity and not seek to emulate those engaged in illegal or immoral activities. Our good God has sent good news to help us to find the straight and narrow path that leads to eternal life. May we each measure our growth and maturity by the qualities that please God. Let us pray. Good and gracious God, we come before you this morning confessing our sinfulness, admitting our need for repentance, and accepting your way as the way that leads to abundant life here and eternal life hereafter. Help us to raise the bar of home and family life, of our work ethic and our way of doing business. Bless us to be a blessing to others, even as we pray our family prayer. Our Father,
who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done, on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our trespasses, as we forgive those who trespass against us. And lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. For thine is the kingdom, the power, and the glory, forever and ever. Amen.
Dr. Hubert Minnis, Peter Turnbull, Brent Simonet, Desmond Bannister, Brent Wells, Jeffrey Lloyd, Dr. Dwayne Sands, Marvin Dane, Frankie Campbell, Dionisio de Aguilar, Michael Pintar, Darren Henfield, Ramal Ferreira, Denisha Rowe, Brenzo Rowe, Elsa Johnson, Philip Davis, Vaughn Miller, Lakeisha Parker Edstrom, Hiram Lewis, Carlton Bonet, James Audrey, Travis Robinson, Adrian Gibson, Donald Saunders, Frederick McElvine, Hank Johnson, Mark Hume, Michael Vogt, Miriam Reckley Emmanuel, Lee Shipman, Reuben Ramming, Ricky Mackey, Shannon Ron Cartwright, Charnel Ferguson, Leonard Anna Martin, Kaiser Ward, Chester Cooper.
Good morning, honorable members and visitors in the gallery. I see we have quite a number of persons in the gallery with us this morning. I want to begin by personally recognizing a former parliamentarian and former Minister, Mr. Lindsay Russell. Ken Russell. My apologies, Ken. Also with us this morning are a number of persons who are guests of the Ministry of Education. We wish to welcome Mr. Bernard, the executioner, Hopkins. He's an American former professional boxer, one of the most successful boxers in the past 3 decades, having held multiple world championships in 2 weight classes, including the undisputed middleweight champion of the world from 2004 to 2005, and the light heavyweight title from 2011 to 2012. Other guests from the Ministry of Education include Max Monroe, the promoter, Yvonne Wisdom, Senior Education Officer, Vincent Strawn, the President of the Bahamas Boxing Federation, and Joy Tate, Personal Assistant to Mr. Hopkins. We also have another delegation with us this morning from the youth. There are a number of youth parliamentarians with us this morning. We have Gabrielle McKenzie, Letice Knowles-Penn, India Wells, Jasmine Colley, Tori Musgrove, I hope I pronounced this one right, Dashe Clark, Edrica Ramming, Britnell Knowles, Elisa Sands, Rainisha Saunders, Kendai Munnings, Jasmine Clark, Ronnie Ramming, Kamita Barry, Robin Thompson, and Alana Dixon. We also have a number of persons with us from the University of the Bahamas. They include Andrea Darvel, now, I might be challenged again on this name, Naisha Tyler, Onisha Adderley, Ranrika Folks, Lydia Cooper, Michelle Prince, Michelle Anderson, and now we have a number of persons from the Seabreeze constituency. Just before I do that, let me recognize Senator Darius. Can you stand for us? And now we have a grouping from the Seabreeze constituency. Alice Watson. That's my home girl, by the way. Edna Hanna. Lizelle Roll. Eugenia Alexis. Monique Dossett. Megan Cooper. Ellery Bodie. Nicholas Bodie. And now, at this time, I wish to call on the Honorable Member for South Beach. The Chair recognizes the Honorable Member for South Beach.
May it please the Honorable Speaker. Sir, it is with great honor and distinction that I rise this morning to celebrate and to acknowledge and to thank the wonderful young parliamentarians that sit in our gallery and members of the University of Bahamas and others from the Seabreeze constituency. And I hope this is fine to preempt for a moment the Honorable Member for Seabreeze and the Minister with responsibility for youth sports, tomorrow being International Women's Day. Friday. Tomorrow is Friday. I wish to acknowledge the great, beautiful women of the world, particularly Bahamian women. Especially women who have served and are serving as members of this honorable House of Assembly and Parliament. And I also wish to give honor and praise and thanks for my wife and my 5 daughters and grandchildren. Mr. Speaker, I rise with great pleasure and privilege this morning to thank and welcome to this honorable House and to the Commonwealth of the Bahamas a man of awesome distinction, having risen from circumstances that were less than honorable in his own personal life, Mr. Bernard Humphrey Hopkins, Jr., world champion several times over. It was in 2004 that he smashed to the canvas the charming and charismatic Oscar De La Hoya to eventually cement his status as the undisputed middleweight champion of the world, while making him the first male boxer to simultaneously hold world titles by all 4 major boxing sanctioning bodies. In 2001, he was recognized as the Fighter of the Year. And in March of this year, he is ranked by BoxRec as the 11th greatest boxer of all time, pound for pound. What is most remarkable about Mr. Hopkins as a guest of the Ministry of Education and hosted this week by our Senior Education Officer, Mr. Yvonne Wisdom, in the sports unit, is that he was born in Philadelphia, and in his early life, he was a criminal. He turned to crime at the age of 13, mugging people. And he himself was stabbed a couple of times, in fact, 3 times. By the time he was 17, he was being sent to the penitentiary in Philadelphia for 18 years for armed robbery. And he spent nearly 5 years in that penitentiary. While there, he witnessed quite a number of most unfortunate criminal and even violent acts. One time, he was standing right next to a man, 2 men, who were fighting over a pack of cigarettes. One of the men was murdered. But while in prison, Mr. Hopkins turned to boxing, and essentially, it saved his life. And once leaving prison, the prison guard told him, "No worry, Bernard, we'll see you back here in a short while." And he turned around and said, "You ain't gonna see me back here ever again." And from that day on, he led a clean life in 1988, and he went on to fight his first bout, and in 2004 became the undisputed middleweight champion of the world. It's an amazing man, Mr. Speaker, because He went on to fight until he was nearly 50. In 2011, at the age of 46, he won again a world championship title in the light heavyweight division. And he was at that time, the oldest fighter ever to beating George Foreman's age, to ever gain a world championship title. As a guest of our ministry, he is here to assist us in being a motivation and inspiration to our young people. And he also is offering himself to speak to and counsel some of our young men in particular who are this day incarcerated in Her Majesty's prison. He has been there, as he was to say, and he knows what he is speaking of when he says that you can turn away from a life of disordered challenges and criminality and to become an icon of honor and respect and achievement in this life. And it's a great joy that we have him as a part of our team. He's an honorary Bahamian. I said to him yesterday that for a man who has had the pugilistic challenges that he has had over the many years, he looks remarkably fine, having taken so many blows, given many blows. If you would go on YouTube and see the fight he had with Roy Jones, when he smashed him to the campus, and at that time Roy was almost seemingly invincible. Yeah. But yet this smooth-looking, handsome fellow in the gallery today is now one of our amazing participants to help usher in a new life for our young people in the Bahamas. So he's going to go around to the schools throughout the country and into the prison and the boys' industrial school, if that's still the name of it, Simpson Penn, I think it is, yeah. And encourage and show that there's a better way, that we do not have to submit. It's not where you come from, but where you come to. It's my honor to welcome and congratulate him for supporting us and encouraging us to be icons of respect and honor.
Thank you, Honorable Member. I just wish to add my sentiments to the Minister, the Honorable Minister. The executioner, I remember him as. He was one of my most favorite boxers. I can remember the black mask that he would wear coming into the ring in his early days, and the cross that he would make. And now he is on a new mission. He's executing a new mission. And we welcome you, sir, into the Bahamas. And we trust that the seeds that you sow will fall on fertile ground and bear good fruit for our young people. At this time, the chair recognizes the honorable member for Cat Island, Rumkey, and San Salvador.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I'd like to lend my voice to the chorus of accolades being showered on the pugilistic hero of that era, the executioner. Mr. Speaker, I think his life illustrates and is the example that there is, all of us have what I call the redemptive qualities, once given a second chance. And yes, he is speaking to the young people, which is laudable. But I ask us here, policymakers, who would know his story, to appreciate what our rules are to ensure that his story informs our initiatives going forward to attend to our youth and because today, Mr. Speaker, there's a huge demographic of young men who would have had brushes with the law, who today cannot find gainful or meaningful employment in this country because we still view them as irredeemable, that their past continues to haunt them throughout their life. And the time has come for us to, as policymakers, to think about initiatives to remove the barrier for those persons who would fall afoul of the law, to ensure that they become more productive citizens. You know, Mr. Speaker, one of the factors that the Privy Council erected for the bar of the execution of capital punishment is that the judge has to advise himself that he has sufficient evidence before him that the person who's been convicted of murder is irredeemable. Not the worst of the worst is one of the factors, that the offense was one of the worst of the worst. But another factor is that the convicted person is irredeemable, cannot be redeemed. That's a high bar. That's a high bar. Because if we all believe in the redemptive power of our Lord, you know, and that is, huh? Yeah. So, Mr. Speaker, I am happy that the Minister of Education saw fit to bring such an exemplar to our country. And perhaps it will even be, it'll be worthwhile, I think, that you allow him to speak to your cabinet, to your policymakers, so that they could appreciate and understand some of what he's gone through and how. I said cabinet. I'm not in cabinet. I'm in cabinet. I will, I will, I have my sources to arrange to meet with him if I wish. But I just say that. But I think a fan only. A fan only. Well, there was a boxer. Yeah, but there was a boxer called Afro Davis. You remember that? There was a boxer called Afro Davis. Afro Davis, yes. Yeah, a very long time ago. No, I happened to train him. Yeah, he was my brother who boxed back in the day. But, Mr. Speaker, I do laud the Minister for recognizing that one of the tools of ensuring that we correct some of the dysfunctional attitudes, and I use the word attitude advisedly, of our young people, is to show that whatever may be your circumstance, right, those circumstances ought not to shape you and or define where you want to be if you have that capacity to be there. I thank you.
Thank you, Honourable Member. Honourable members, we also have a number of persons here from the Fox Hill constituency. And you know what they say about a Fox Hill gal. And we have 3 Fox Hill gals with us, if I can use that term. We have Miss Lorna Newbold, Miss Georgette Gardner, and Mrs. Naoshi Bowen. The chair now recognizes the honourable member for Fox Hill.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, today is International Women's Day. And at some point, I got you. Don't worry, I got you. International Women's Day. And so I know we will speak to this at a later point. But I thought it was important that women from Fox will be here. And I'm really thrilled that I'm glad women were not boxing at that time when the executioner was in the ring. I much prefer to land in a sandpit than to have one of those blows coming at me. But welcome to the Bahamas. What an amazing story. What an inspiring story. We welcome you. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Honorable Member. The Chair now recognizes the Honorable Member for Southern Shores.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. And I wish to take this opportunity to pay my continued gratitude to the good people of Southern Shores. Mr. Speaker, I'm going to make a brief statement on the question of International Women's Day and my trip to the 63rd session of the Commission on the Status of Women. But, Mr. Speaker, if you will indulge me, I want to share a moment, an experience that I had this morning that brought me near to tears. You know, it is said that as politicians, ours is a thankless job, and we have to have these broad shoulders and tough skin for the criticism that we often get, sometimes which we probably deserve. But this morning, Mr. Speaker, I had the occasion to visit with the children at the Center for the Deaf, where I presented the keys for a brand new generator to that faculty and staff. This presentation resulted in my visit in September, where I learned that the teachers would switch the lights on and off to get the attention of the students that are hearing impaired. And then on leaving, I learned that they have no generator. So if the lights were off, the teachers were unable to get their attention. And so through the ministry, we presented them with a brand new generator. But the children presented me with this, Mr. Speaker. With various expressions of gratitude for something that they perceived as a great gift, but something that I believe that they should have automatically. And so I want to express my gratitude to the children of the Center for the Deaf from here. Mr. Speaker, the Bahamas will join countries around the world in celebrating International Women's Day, which is observed on the 8th of March annually. International Women's Day is set aside to celebrate the achievement of women as well as reflect on issues and challenges that face our women and girls. This is a time to pause and to celebrate the varied roles that women play in our country. Today, we applaud and salute the women of the Bahamas for their tenacity and strength. I pause to applaud the women of our Parliament for their tenacity and their strength. And I also recognize the women who have passed through these halls, whose shoulders they stand on. We owe a debt of gratitude to the matriarchs and trailblazers of our society who fought alongside their male counterparts for justice and equality. Women in the Bahamas have made and continue to make invaluable contributions to nation building. Mr. Speaker, the United Nations theme for International Women's Day 2019 is Think Equal, Build Smart, Innovate for Change. The theme echoes the clarion call for all sectors of our society to be creative and innovative in bringing about gender equality and the empowerment of all women and girls. The Department of Gender and Family Affairs of my ministry continues to strengthen relationships with its national, regional, and international partners. Mr. Speaker, women have excelled in just about every area of our society. In the judiciary, in education, in health, in the public service. Regrettably, Mr. Speaker, there is that lack of representation in the halls of Parliament. And so I want to take this opportunity to congratulate Ms. Komolafi, who has been elected leader of the Democratic National Alliance, who I'm satisfied will make her contribution in an attempt to change those numbers. I wish her well. Mr. Speaker, activities for this global observance are, well, we had a church service in true Bahamian tradition. Every week of activity begins with a church service at Evangelistic Temple on the 3rd. The National Women's Advisory Council Strategic Stakeholders Luncheon will be held on the 7th, that's tomorrow. An information pep rally for students and staff at the University of the Bahamas will also be held tomorrow. School visitations by the staff of the Department of Gender and Family Affairs on the 8th. There will also be an awards ceremony and luncheon for former and current presidents of Urban Renewal Senior Citizens Associations on the 8th of March. Mr. Speaker, I want to take this opportunity to thank the Minister of Education for having invited the executioner to come and be with us, to execute in a different role as we celebrate all the achievements of our women and girls. I continuously advise my partners and stakeholders in this endeavor that we cannot afford to lose Adam. That Adam is still an endangered species. Our boys need to be brought along. Our beautiful girls, whom we seek to empower, will at some point seek a partner. And so we have an obligation to ensure that they can find positive, contributing, productive males with whom to partner. Executioner, I thank you. Mr. Speaker, the Commission on Status of Women. In a few days, I will head a delegation comprising representatives of government and non-governmental agencies whose work focuses on the economic, social, and political progress of women to attend the 63rd session of the Commission on the Status of Women, CSW. The session will be held at the United Nations headquarters in New York from the 11th to the 22nd of March. The priority theme for CSW 63 is social protection systems, access to public services, and sustainable infrastructure for gender equality and the empowerment of women and girls. The Commission on the Status of Women is the principal global intergovernmental body exclusively dedicated to the promotion of gender equality. A functional commission of the Economic and Social Council was established.
They're calling you now.
A functional commission of the Economic and Social Council was established by resolution in 1946. The Commission on the Status of Women is instrumental in promoting women's rights, documenting the reality of women's lives throughout the world, and shaping global standards on gender equality and the empowerment of women. At CSW, I will address the General Assembly on the progress of the Bahamas in fulfilling the mandate of the United Nations, as well as participate in a number of sessions which will provide research data and best practices on social protection systems and policies for the advancement of women and girls. We're justifiably proud, Mr. Speaker, of the many achievements of Bahamian women in all sectors of our society. The many women in our gallery, adorned in their purple or wearing their purple ribbons, who've come to lend support to this very special occasion. I ask women throughout the Commonwealth to join them. I ask men throughout the Commonwealth to join them on Friday, March 8th, as they celebrate this special day. Mr. Speaker, I also want to take this occasion to admonish those who are minded to harm our women and girls to repent of the mere thought, Mr. Speaker. I admonish those who seek to harm our women and girls to turn away from their wicked ways, Mr. Speaker. I ask all here present and all within the sound of my voice to take it a personal responsibility to keep an open eye, to be the good Samaritan, to be the good neighbor, to look out for and to help protect our women and girls. Mr. Speaker, I thank you.
Thank you, Honorable Member. Introduction and swearing in. Oh, the chair recognizes the Honorable Member for Seabreeze. Honorable Member, are you making a statement or communication?
Yes, communication, Mr. Speaker.
Okay, we haven't arrived at that point yet. But if you prefer to do it now, the chair will honor that request.
At your discretion, Mr. Speaker.
Okay, let's get to that point in the order of business. Introduction and swearing in of new members. Laying of documents by ministers. Honorable Member for Southern Shores, are you laying that communication? Or order that the document be brought up? Order that the document do lie on the table. Further laying of documents by ministers.
Further laying of documents, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Honorable Member. Statements and communications by ministers. The chair recognizes the Honorable Member for Seabreeze.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, with your leave this morning, I would like to lay on the table of the House two communications, one with respect, or one in my capacity as a female minister, and the other as chair of the Commonwealth Women Parliamentary. Mr. Speaker, before I go into those substantive remarks, I would like to congratulate Mr. Bernard Hopkins, and I think the president of the Boxing Federation that is here, and I'm just congratulate him for the tenacity he's shown over the years, and to say that the young people in particular and our entire nation, we are proud of him, and we are grateful that he has chosen to do what he has chosen to do for the betterment of himself and for others. And so indeed, I congratulate you and thank you for being here and for being the representative that you've been over the years. Mr. Speaker, International Women's Day will be celebrated on Friday, the 8th of March 2019, as it has been from 1909, 110 years. History would have it that it was during the International Socialist Women's Conference in 1910 in Denmark, comprising a delegation of 100 women from 17 different countries, that German socialist Louise Zietz proposed the establishment of an annual International Women's Day. It was seconded by fellow socialist Clara Zetkin and supported by one Kate Dunker. Mr. Speaker, the body agreed that this resolution was a needed strategy to promote equal rights, including suffrage for women. The following year, on March 19, 1911, International Women's Day was marked for the first time by over 1 million people in Austria, in Denmark, in Germany, and Switzerland. Mr. Speaker, women used this time to demand the right to vote and to hold public office, and protested against employment and sex discrimination. In different countries, Mr. Speaker, International Women's Day was celebrated annually on varying dates. However, perhaps following the example of Germany and perhaps in unspoken honor of the bravery of the mover of the IWD resolution, International Women's Day is held on March 8th of each year since 1914. Mr. Speaker, I want to pause here and say thank you, Mr. Speaker, for recognizing all of the women here that represent a cross-section of the female gender in our society. We have young women, we have mature women, we have older women from every walk of life, and today they are here as one to support and recognize the work of the women before us and the work of the women today with regard to women. Mr. Speaker, truth is, the IWD, or International Women's Day as we know it, was and is a movement. Recorded in the annals of history is the demonstrations, Mr. Speaker, unfortunately, the arrests of women. But more importantly, Mr. Speaker, the record reflects women of courage, women of strength and tenacity. And this was demonstrated by women working together on an international front towards national goals. Mr. Speaker, as a result of the movement which evolved into the women's suffrage, women, country by country, gained the right to vote. Here in the Bahamas, Dame Doris Johnson, the names that we recall, Mary Ingram, Eugenia Lockhart, Mabel Walker, Georgiana Simonet, and others, our foremothers, are heralded for having succeeded in their movement as a result of the work of the suffragettes. Hence, in 1962, Mr. Speaker, women in the Bahamas first gained and experienced the right to vote, and to vote as women. Mr. Speaker, what is significant is that the fruits of that labor and movement of women were not only enjoyed by women, but these fruits have also been enjoyed by men, as men who did not own property in the Bahamas and who before could not vote because of that impediment also obtained the right to vote. And hence, on the 10th of January 1967, as a result of the work of strong women, we obtained majority rule, and following in 1973, we obtained our independence and recognition as the Commonwealth of the Bahamas. Mr. Speaker, women are here to support, to be a pillar of strength, and to stand beside our male counterparts in every aspect of the growth and development of our country. It is my perception, Mr. Speaker, that the spirit and intent of the movement was and is to partner with our male counterparts to advance the healthy and the sustainable growth and development of our country, of our nations. Toward that end, the substantive cause of the suffrage movement having been realized, Mr. Speaker, we now celebrate the movement, and instead of only demonstrations, Mr. Speaker, we now celebrate. We celebrate the world each year We celebrate world-around each year our accomplishments as women, and it serves as a reminder and clarion call that though we celebrate, we must yet continue to move until the world reflects an environment where every person is treated as an equal. Mr. Speaker, we cannot ignore the fact that women still have ways to go in terms of the level of support and cooperation we are afforded and that we afford each other under the causes that are distinct and that affect us. Mr. Speaker, demonstrating serious commitment to the need for equal rights to not only be talked about but put into action, the United Nations, in recognizing the plight of women, has promulgated as goal number 5 of the Sustainable Development Goals, the goal to achieve gender equality and the empowerment of all women and girls. Mr. Speaker, I believe all women of the Bahamas remain committed to achieving that goal, as I would have stated during the country's statement at the 62nd session of CSW in 2018. Mr. Speaker, I do wish the Minister of Social Services and Urban Development and this year's delegation all the best as they represent our country and as he champions the cause for women. And Mr. Speaker, I pause here to say I have every confidence in that minister, whom I know personally, also as a former police officer. As a matter of fact, he was instrumental in my being elected as a part of the Police Staff Association, and hence my political career. So, Mr. Speaker, as he champions the cause for women during the 63rd session on the Commission on the Status of Women, which plenary conference will be held in New York from the 11th to the 22nd of March 2019. The priority themes are focused on social protection systems, access to public services, and sustainable infrastructure for gender equality and the empowerment of women and girls. Mr. Speaker, recognizing that as women we have a duty, and particularly as the leading women in the country, myself and the member for West End and Bimini, the member for Mykyle, the member for Fox Hill, and the member for Angliston, together with our contemporaries in the Senate, we are by our very nature committed to championing the cause for the promotion, for the protection, and the empowerment of women and girls. And to this biased commitment, Mr. Speaker, as women, we offer no apology. Mr. Speaker, that being said, in walking the walk, my ministry is hosting through the Division of Youth, who is leading the charge to host the inaugural Be Conference, or Be Empowered Mentor to Mentee Conference, on this Friday, International Women's Day, the 8th of March 2019, at 10 a.m. at the Hilton Hotel, West Bay Street, where the Division of Youth will gather many women, focusing on high school girls. And I want to pause here to say how much the Ministry of Youth, Sports and Culture enjoys the relationship we share with the Ministry of Education. And so we are so thankful for their continued cooperation, Mr. Speaker, through you to the Minister of Education, in order to ensure that our youth are empowered, and in particular our girls. But this conference will be focusing on high school girls, who will have the honor of hearing from, among others, Dame Janet Bostwick herself, who we see as our living legend. Our theme for this B conference is Moving Forward Together. Delegates will have the fortune of hearing from one who was, in her time, at first the Lone Ranger in the cabinet, but having the support of the more than 50% of women who vote in this country. Break the glass ceilings is what she did for women, becoming the first woman to be elected to the House of Assembly under an F&M administration, and who also served as the first female Attorney General and the first female Minister of Foreign Affairs. And Mr. Speaker, she went so far under that administration as acting Prime Minister. Mr. Speaker, because of her stellar leadership and resilience, successive governments have saw the wisdom in adding women to the cabinet. Mr. Speaker, invites to all members of Parliament with respect to this event have been circulated, I am told, in this honorable House, and all of my colleagues, you are invited to come and support us. I see, Mr. Speaker, a number of persons are dressed or adorned in their purple, which is the color this year, and I see the good member for South and Central Andrews is in the good mood. We have on the full lavender purple, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, we thank him. But Mr. Speaker, because of that wise administration gave one woman the opportunity, because that wise administration gave one woman the opportunity, and we will continue to stand on the record and work of one Dame Janet Bostwick. Many followed, and today I am here with Dame Bostwick as my example, that though I am one voice, I speak for and with the support of many. During that event, in the best way we can, Mr. Speaker, we intend to say thank you to Dame Bostwick and to recognize as well all the sitting female parliamentarians of the House of Assembly and the Senate. Mr. Speaker, many should understand and appreciate that more hands make work light. And with only one Glenys Hannah Martin in the opposition, with the only one woman in the cabinet, and only 4 in the House of Assembly, this makes our role triple as hard. Thus, and finally, in our role as Commonwealth women parliamentarians, and certainly in my role as chairman of that body, which comprises all the women of Parliament, I will continue, Mr. Speaker, to lead the charge in the promotion and representation of issues that affect women and seek to effect the change necessary to ensure our growth and success on the leadership front. That being said, Mr. Speaker, the reality is we live in a democracy, and thus it is the burden of any woman seeking office, same as the men, to answer the call to leadership, make the commitment and the sacrifice necessary to win the hearts and minds of constituents, which includes whomever is leader of the country, in whose hands it rests to select his leadership team for the overall good of the country. Mr. Speaker, in concluding this communication, I wish to commend this government, for the establishment of the office of the spouse. Mr. Speaker, that office has, in the short time it has been operational, been instrumental in lifting the heavy burden of these 4 women. Mistress Minnis, and we've had the opportunity as women members of Parliament to pay a courtesy call on that office. And Mistress Minnis was gracious enough just this week to have received us. But through her tireless efforts, has assisted countless women in hearing their concerns and directing them to the necessary agencies that can offer help, in addition to raising awareness of issues that affect women and girls and promoting healthy living and family life. Mr. Speaker, they say whenever you're a preacher, you say finally, finally. But finally, Mr. Speaker, I want to commend the good member for Kalani. It would be remiss of me not to do so. Our most honorable Prime Minister, for his wisdom in appointing me to the cabinet to ensure that the voice of 1 of 4 is represented, for appointing another in the ranks of parliamentary secretary, and the other 2 as chairman of very significant operations, and for the appointment of our sister, Kay Forbes Smith, as president of the Senate, and the appointment of our other sister, Senator Dr. Mildred Hall Watson, as Vice President of the Senate, who are each doing an exceptional job, Mr. Speaker, in their roles. While we are low in the numbers on the elected side here in the lower chamber, Mr. Speaker, Prime Minister was intentional in ensuring we were well represented in the upper chamber. And for this, Mr. Speaker, I say the good member for Kalani, our honorable Prime Minister, most honorable, today, the women thank you. Mr. Speaker, I join the member of Southern Shores. Mr. Speaker, I also want to join the good member for Southern Shores in congratulating Orinthia Kumalafi on her ascension to the leadership of the Democratic National Alliance, and do say that I wish her all the best in her role. I wish to commend the Department of Gender, Mr. Speaker, and Family Affairs, and all women for their contribution to the cycle of female development. Mr. Speaker, that being said, the women are today wearing our purple pins in honor of the designated color for International Women's Day. I do thank all women that have today, Mr. Speaker, demonstrated their support by taking the time to visit us in this honorable place. And I extend a wonderful International Women's Day to all women and girls, commending to your thoughts the 1779 words of clergyman John Newton, who said at stanza 3 in the lyrics of his song, Amazing Grace, "Through many dangers, toils, and snares, we have already come. It was grace that brought us safe this far, and it is grace, women, that will lead us on." Mr. Speaker, before I give the final statement, I want to recognize my mother, Pastor, my mother, Pastor Lorraine Russell, my hero, my aunts, and my 5 sisters, of whom I am the eldest, my 2 daughters, and the matriarch of my family, Miss Effie Evans, my grandmother. Through you to the women of this nation, Mr. Speaker, and indeed the world, may I say, I do not believe the good Lord has brought us safe this far to leave us now. Let us not lose hope, women, but continue building on the strong foundation that has already been laid, and let us continue to build together.
Thank you, Honorable Member.
Mr. Speaker. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The second communication is with respect to the Ministry of Youth, Sports, and Culture directly, with regard to an update
Honorable Member.
Yes, Mr. Speaker.
The first communication ordered that the document be brought up.
Thank you.
Further statements and communication by ministers. Order that the document do lie on the table.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Speaker, this one is going to be short. Mr. Speaker, they don't trust the preacher. But Mr. Speaker, it was the late Marcus Garvey who said, "A people without the knowledge of their past history, origin, and culture is like a tree without root," end quote. The Ministry of Youth, Sports, and Culture reflects the spirit of our nation and expresses the extent of the resilience that characterizes the Bahamian people from Bimini in the north to Inagua in the south. Mr. Speaker, significant events are occurring in and through the Division of Culture, the Division of Youth, and the Department of Sports. Therefore, I wish to provide an update concerning the pertinent and ongoing programs of my ministry which are relevant to the Bahamian people today. The Arts Education Partnership, or AEP, was established in 1995 through a unique interagency agreement between the National Endowment for the Arts and the U.S. Department of Education. The organization is committed to making high-quality arts education accessible to all U.S. students. Based on a study prepared by that organization entitled Critical Evidence, How the Arts Benefits Student Achievement, over 62 studies from 100 researchers noted that, Mr. Speaker, and I quote, "Students who received more arts education did better on standardized tests, improved their social skills, and were more motivated than those who had reduced or no access," end quote. Mr. Speaker, the report goes on to further categorize the significant impact of the various arts. Drama, they say, helps with understanding social relationships, complex issues and emotions, improve concentrated thought and story comprehension. Music, the report significantly states, improves math achievement and proficiency, reading and cognitive development, and it boosts SAT verbal scores and skills for second language learners. Dance, the report says, helps with creative thinking, originality, elaboration, and flexibility, improves express skills, social tolerance, self-confidence, and persistence. The visual arts, the report says, improve content and organization of writing, promote sophisticated reading skills and interpretation of text, reasoning about scientific images, and reading readiness. Multi-arts, a combination of art forms, the report says, helps with reading, verbal, and math skills, improves the ability to collaborate and higher order thinking skills. Mr. Speaker, I share this study for the simple fact that my ministry recognizes the significance that the arts play not only in education, but in cultivating well-rounded and healthy citizens. To this end, over the past 60 years, the Division of Culture has nurtured and grown what is arguably one of the most important national programs in our country. It is the E. Clement Bethel National Arts Festival. The E. Clement Bethel National Arts Festival is the only festival of its kind in the Bahamas. Staff members of the Division of Culture, professionals of the arts industry, and a technical team from the nation's leading broadcasting network, ZNS, have all traveled and will continue to travel to every island and key that has submitted their applications and expressed their interest in participating in the festival. As a result of our program each year, Mr. Speaker, we address the need to provide arts education and performance opportunities from ages 4 to 104 years old. The season has just started, Mr. Speaker, and we've already judged 4-year-old dancers from Tarpon Bay Luthra and Acklands to a 91-year-old male from Mayagüana who proudly sang Bulaland. In 2018, my ministry invested approximately $140,000 for the festival. We impacted approximately 15 of the 19 major islands, 300 schools, and 5,000 children ages 4 to 18 years. We have provided international scholarships, opportunities to the winners of the dance, the drama, the art, and music categories. And in addition to this, our national winners were honored at the E. Clement Bethel National Arts Festival Awards ceremony hosted at Bahama. Mr. Speaker, this year's festival was launched on February 6th. We have received a significant increase in participation of participants, and perhaps due to our increased media and social media coverage. In New Providence alone, Mr. Speaker, we have gone from 767 entrants last year to 1,100 prospective entrants for this year. And this number, Mr. Speaker, is still climbing. To date, my ministry has traveled to Eleuthera, Inagua, Mayagüana, Acklands, and San Salvador. The estimated expenditure for this year is projected at $204,000. The small budget, Mr. Speaker, we make a massive social, artistic, and economic imprint. And as a ministry, we are extremely proud to have achieved this mammoth undertaking. Mr. Speaker, as the Ministry of Youth, Sports, and Culture keeps with the pulse of this generation, we are optimistic about our investment in the E. Clement Bethel National Arts Festival and, by extension, the creative and cultural industries, or CCI. Our mission, Mr. Speaker, is to provide access and opportunity for all in the CCIs. Our Latin American neighbors' CCI economy, Mr. Speaker, this is some valuable information, generates $124 billion in revenues, 6% of CCI global market, and 1.9 million jobs, 7% of the CCI jobs. Latin America and the Caribbean region possesses a rich cultural and national heritage, with 131 sites inscribed on the World Heritage List. And many Latin American writers have achieved global acclaim. Multimedia conglomerates own a spread of TV, radio, and press interests, capturing large audiences and producing distinctive TV programs. This is a virtual, Mr. Speaker, untapped market for the Bahamas, and it is our hope that we will garner the same returns due to our investment in culture across the country with this unique program. The E. Clement Bethel Arts Program has reared extraordinary talents, and I do believe it is now the time to turn these talents into currency through continued investment. Mr. Speaker, I would like to share our remaining calendar of events for the E. Clement Bethel Festival. National Arts Festival, South Andros is March 4th through 5th. North Andros, March 6th through 8th. New Providence, March 12th through 22nd. Grand Bahama, March 25th through April 5th. Abaco, April 8th to 11th. Bimini, April 29th. Berry Islands, April 30th. Exuma Keys, May 1st. Long Island, May 13th to 14th. Cat Island, May 15th to 16th. Mr. Speaker, my ministry remains committed to impacting every island of this great nation. I invite all islands to remain ready as my ministry visits to adjudicate the many talented residents. With respect to Junior Junkanoo, Mr. Speaker, we are continuing. In addition to the E. Clement Bethel National Arts Festival, our Junkanoo season is still in effect. My ministry is particularly focused on the development of Junior Junkanoo across the Bahamas. To date, the ministry has spent an estimated $400,000, having provided supplies, logistics support, and prizes to the continued development of this event. Winning schools can expect to receive certificates, trophies, computers, and instruments to enhance their music programs. I am delighted, Mr. Speaker, to report to my colleagues and MPs of the Family Islands that your schools are included in the prized groups. The Junior Junkanoo program is in its 31st year of existence and has expanded across 11 islands and counting. From July through January, we've extended Junkanoo education development opportunities to the youth of our nation. We do this through offerings such as Junkanoo summer camps and in-class and after-school teaching support. The season runs from July through March of every year, giving Bahamians an opportunity to be domestic tourists, hopping from island to enjoy each one's unique exhibition and expression of Junior Junkanoo. As a result of these parades, Family Island local economies are financially stimulated. Food vendors, Bahamian craft vendors, airlines, shops, hotels, and restaurants all look forward to this annual stimulus and direct benefit. Mr. Speaker, I came from Abaco last week, and I can tell you we are extremely proud of the performance of those young people. Their level of professionalism and synchronization, and Mr. Speaker, simply their commitment to culture was indeed noteworthy and outstanding. Yes, Mr. Speaker. Family Island schools also had the opportunity to participate in the National Junior Junkanoo Parade on Bay Street in the capital city. This was a significant experience for all involved, having the opportunity to connect, to share, to learn, and compete with their peers. In 2019, 80 schools have participated in the Junior Junkanoo program with an estimated participation of 9,000 students from ages 2 to 18 years. Mr. Speaker, I would like to share the remaining dates for the Junior and Senior Junkanoo Parades. Cat Island Junior Junkanoo, March 2nd. Acklands Junior Junkanoo, March 9th. First time for Acklands. Inagua Junior Junkanoo, March 16th. San Salvador Junior Junkanoo, first time, March 21st. Cat Island, Rumkey, and San Salvador. The good member is not even listening, Mr. Speaker. First time we bring a Junior Junkanoo to San Sal under this government. Indeed, Mr. Speaker. South Andros Junior Junkanoo, March 22nd. Mangrove Key Senior Junkanoo, March 22nd. South Andros Senior Junkanoo, March 23rd. Mr. Speaker, and we recently held on Saturday past the elaborate awards banquet. Mr. Speaker, in terms of the youth programs, I send these remarks. I wish to remind all of our mission at the Division of Youth, which is to provide national direction for youth development to aid young people in the successful transition into adulthood. With this mission intricately impacting our initiatives, we are constantly striving to create opportunities for the positive and holistic development of our young people, whether it be social, economic, or personal development. My team at the Division of Youth understands that our young people are neither identical or one-dimensional. Therefore, it is crucial that we devise numerous strategies which cater to all interests of our youth. With the conclusion of our Fresh Start program and Job Ready programs, which focused on training and work experience, our focus has now shifted to the innovative young minds of this great nation, our youth entrepreneurs. Mr. Speaker, the overwhelming drive of our young entrepreneurs is what propelled my team to redesign the formerly known Self-Starter program and in its place create a program which addresses every aspect of entrepreneurship, now known as the BE Inspired program. In addition to the capital provided to young entrepreneurs to assist in launching their business, the redesigned structure of the Be Inspired program offers greater training, monitoring, and evaluation opportunities to its participants. Through this program, Mr. Speaker, we seek to empower our young entrepreneurs. Mr. Speaker, my ministry has just launched this program on February 28th, and by instituting this program on numerous family islands, it is our aim to help our young people to realize their dreams and aspirations. Mr. Speaker, we've also had 110 graduates of the Youth Leader Certification Program, 69 from the Fresh Start Program, and 42 from Job Ready. And finally, in respect of sports, Mr. Speaker, my ministry will be sending representatives to the Special Olympics this month. It's youth, sports, and culture, Mr. Speaker, all in one. So Carifta is next month, and then the World Relays, and then the World Games Championships. The division provides financial and administrative support, Mr. Speaker, and this is important to note. The ministry, through the Department of Sports, provides financial and administrative support to all approved sporting federations, athletes, and programs designed to develop sports, promote our athletes, and enhance our country's outlook. Mr. Speaker, I wish to thank my colleagues, Minister Jeffrey Lloyd, Minister of Education, Mr. Marvin Dames, Minister of National Security, whose team members work hand in hand to bring all of the programs of the Ministry of Youth, Sports, and Culture to successful fruition. Our Prime Minister has doubled, Mr. Speaker, and this is important, I must say, the prize money under our head, or the budget head number 47, and these prize monies, as I would have indicated, is being processed as we speak in collaboration with the Junkanoo Corporation of New Providence. Mr. Speaker, good things are happening in our nation. We thank the government and the people of the Bahamas, and thank God for his many blessings on this our Commonwealth. I do thank you.
Thank you, Honourable Member. Order that the communication be brought up. Members of the gallery, as may I have your attention, we are going to take a 10-minute suspension shortly so that those who wish to take photographs with you can do so. So if you can bear with us just for another few moments. Order that the document do lie on the table. Chair recognizes the Honourable Member for Bamboo Town.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I do move at this point in time that the House suspends for about 15 minutes to give us an opportunity to be able to take pictures with the executioner. And so, Mr. Speaker, I do move that the House now suspends.
Honourable members, it has been moved and seconded that the business of this House do suspend for 15 minutes. As many as are in favor will remain seated. Those who oppose will stand. Order that the business of this House suspend for 15 minutes. Communication by the clerk. Messages from the Governor General. Messages from the Senate. Motions for leave of absence, leave to resign seat, and new writs. Presentations of petitions. Presentations of report of committees. Adoption of reports of committees. First reading of bills. Second reading and committal of bills. The chair recognizes the Honourable Member for East Grand Bahama.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, while I wait for the podium, I'd just like to join in with my colleagues in celebrating this International Women's Week and join with those sentiments. As we know today, our country would not have made the advances, both social and economic, if it were not for some very strong Bahamian women. And so it gives me pleasure to stand and to recognize them and to share in all of the accolades well-deserved accolades that have been spoken this morning. Mr. Speaker, I rise this morning to address the House on the Investment Funds Bill 2019 that was tabled in this House last week. Mr. Speaker, at the outset, let me say that this is a technical bill. It is very complicated, and as I struggle to try and make this relevant and to make it such that the Bahamians would understand it, it is a difficult job to do, and I admit that, so I say that up front. Nonetheless, Mr. Speaker, it is an important bill, as hopefully Parliament will get from it, because it is one of those pieces of modernization of legislation that is required to not only continue to make us competitive in the financial services industry, but also to meet our commitments with respect to international regulatory compliance requirements. And so with that warning, I was going to call it a warning, but with that transparency, I will do my endeavor best. But Mr. Speaker, this piece of legislation proposes to modernize the vital investment funds industry in the Bahamas by introducing an overhauled legal and regulatory framework that is compliant with international standards and best practices, and is replete with improved provisions to protect investors and lay the foundation to attract new and increased business into the Bahamas. Mr. Speaker, it is often said that the financial services industry is an important pillar in our economy, and indeed it is a necessity that we continue to modernize and to innovate in order to stay relevant and indeed to keep up with international developments. The investment funds form a critical component of the Bahamas Financial Services Toolkit. At 31st December 2018, there were 749 licensed investment funds and 72 licensed investment fund administrators in the Bahamas. The investment fund industry has been an exemplar of Bahamian innovation in financial services, giving birth to the world's leading specific mandate alternative regulatory test fund product in 2003, known by the industry as the SMART Fund. And more recently, the Investment Condominium, or ICON, a groundbreaking bespoke legal structure for Bahamian investment funds. Despite the industry being a center for Bahamian financial services innovation, the legislation and regulations governing the sector have become outdated and now pose a risk to the reputation of the jurisdiction as a world-leading financial services center. Mr. Speaker, allow me to provide some background behind some of the key events leading to the need to overhaul the existing legislation and briefly discuss the development of the bill. The legislation currently governing the investment funds industry is the Investment Funds Act 2003, along with its subordinate regulations and rules. The legislation is administered by the Securities Commission of the Bahamas. I note that in its function as regulating and overseeing investment funds, securities, and capital markets, the Securities Commission also administers the Securities Industry Act 2011. The Securities Commission is also the duly appointed inspector of financial and corporate services, and in this capacity administers the Financial and Corporate Services Providers Act 2000. When the current investment funds legislation was introduced, its provisions were largely suitable for the regulation of the industry at that time. The legislation provided for the supervision and oversight of investment funds in an environment where the majority of the consumers of investment fund products in the Bahamas were sophisticated investors or trustees, private bankers, and wealth managers that represented them. The regulatory framework was in line with the structure and needs of the Bahamas financial services industry at that time and sufficient to satisfy the international standards and best practices of the day. By the time the Bahamas underwent its peer review under the International Monetary Fund, or the IMF, Financial Sector Assessment Program in 2012, also called the FSAP, the world of financial regulation had become a very different place. The global economy had suffered through the financial crisis of 2008, and the government and international standard setters were ratcheting up regulatory standards, transparency expectations, and genuine pressure to conform with espoused principles at a previously unprecedented rate. Although the jurisdiction received generally good results for the overall compliance of its securities regulation with international standards, when it came to investment funds in particular, the Bahamas failed 4 of the 5 principles. To summarize these very broadly, they were deficiencies related to the fact that only the investment fund administrator and not the fund operator, manager, or custodian was subject to full assessment of its governance, organization, and operational conduct. 2, specific requirements regarding the operational conduct of custodians and the segregation of client assets was not in the Investment Funds Act. 3, there were insufficient obligations regarding conduct in the valuation, pricing, and redemption of underlying securities. And 4, managers, advisors of hedge funds were not subject to appropriate oversight. This, of course, was and is unacceptable for an international financial center purporting to be a regional leader in wealth management. So the process to develop a modern piece of legislation compliant with international standards and conducive to a globally competitive industry commenced. The bill before you now is the culmination of those years of development, and the Securities Commission was responsible for its development. To accomplish the task, the Commission relied on its own regulatory experience and its understanding of the local industry and international regulatory expectations, augmented with expertise of technical and drafting consultants from the local private bar. The provisions of the draft bill were benchmarked against the legislation of various jurisdictions, including the United Kingdom, the Cayman Islands, the British Virgin Islands, Luxembourg, Singapore, Jersey, and Guernsey. The Securities Commission also established an Investment Fund Act technical team comprised of industry professionals to ensure the voice of industry was represented throughout the project by reviewing and providing comments on the bill at various stages of its drafting. On the 27th of November 2017, the Securities Commission submitted the draft bill for public consultation, which concluded on the 28th of February 2018. Subsequent comments received as a result of the consultation were considered and, where appropriate, are reflected in the bill. Mr. Speaker, with some understanding of the impetus for the overhauled legislation and of the process used to develop it, allow me to discuss the major changes the bill will now introduce. The first is the licensing triggers. Among the more fundamental of the changes the bill proposes is to rewrite what an investment fund is for the purposes of licensing and regulation, and what it means to carry on investment fund businesses in or from the Bahamas. The result is that the conditions that would require or trigger a fund or its various operators and managers or related parties to be licensed have been changed in the proposed legislation. The definition of an investment fund in the new bill is a unit trust, a company, partnership, or investment condominium that issues or has equity interest the purpose or effect of which is the pooling of investor funds with the aim of spreading investment risk and achieving profits or gains from the acquisition, holding, management, or disposal of investments. Unlike the previous definition, there is no other requirement for a connection or nexus to the Bahamas built into it. Under the provisions of the bill, licensing as an investment fund is triggered by an entity that fits the definition of an investment fund carrying on or attempting to carry on business in or from the Bahamas. Regarding what it means for an investment fund to be carrying on business in or from the Bahamas, the definition has been expressly included in the proposed bill and now applies to an investment fund that is incorporated in the Bahamas or offered for sale to non-accredited investors in the Bahamas. Mr. Speaker, by non-accredited investors, I refer to individual investors rather than institutions such as banks and insurance companies who do not meet specific wealth criteria, such as having a net worth in excess of $1 million or making an individual income of $200,000 annually, as an example. This provision ensures that the triggering for licensing and regulations are oriented to the protection of those most vulnerable and needing perhaps the greatest protection from a regulatory perspective, that is, ordinary persons for whom an investment gone wrong as a result of misconduct or infraction of securities laws will have the greatest financial impact. Also of note, these new definitions mean the investment funds are eligible for licensing based on the activity they conduct or intend to conduct and who will be impacted by those activities, and not on whether or not certain service providers to the fund are located or licensed in the Bahamas. The new definition provides the wealth management industry some new flexibility. To give an example of this, if an IBC or international business company was deemed an accredited investor, its decision to invest in an investment fund would not trigger the need for that investment fund to be licensed in the Bahamas, opening many more investment options for the Bahamian wealth management service provider. While on the subject of key definitions, I wish to also highlight the change to the definition of non-Bahamas-based investment fund. Under the prevailing act, an investment fund that is not a Bahamas-based investment fund, but is being sold in the Bahamas or has any other nexus to the Bahamas, such as having appointed a Bahamian manager or advisor, was deemed to be a non-Bahamas-based investment fund, and hence was subject to the regulatory regime for non-Bahamas-based funds. This meant, amongst other things, that the fund would be required to appoint a representative in the Bahamas. And therefore, if an investment fund in the Bahamas wanted to invest in, for example, an American investment fund for its high net worth clients, that fund would have had to appoint a representative in the Bahamas just to allow the manager to invest in that American fund. I think we can all quickly understand how such provision needlessly complicates business and reduces the competitiveness of investment managers from this jurisdiction. This requirement was deemed to be needlessly burdensome, particularly considering the regulatory risk that would arise from selling a foreign security to accredited investors within the Bahamas was properly and responsibility of the regulators properly the responsibility of the regulator in the fund's home jurisdiction. Therefore, the bill proposes that non-Bahamas-based investment funds is to mean an investment fund that is incorporated, registered, or established in a jurisdiction other than the Bahamas, but has a nexus to the Bahamas through it being administered or managed in the Bahamas. Mr. Speaker, you will recall I indicated that a primary impetus for the overhaul of the legislation was related to the jurisdiction's performance under the IMF's FSAP 2012 peer review in the matter of investment fund regulations. Several of the key deficiencies in the investment fund's legislative framework revolved around the regulatory approach of the previous bill, which placed an inordinate emphasis on the investment fund's administrator as a touch point to triggering licensing and oversight, rather than the activities being conducted and the regulatory risk those activities posed to the jurisdiction. This shift away from a focus on the investment fund administrator will be among the more notable for the investment funds industry, but is fundamental to rebalancing the regulation and oversight of the securities industry, investment fund industry. It goes hand in hand with some of the provisions I'm about to discuss, such as regarding the regulation of investment fund managers and custodians. Together, they will result in improved investor protection as key functions and responsibilities are realigned to the proper parties and the regulator is able to fully assess their governance, organization, and operational conduct. Under the proposed bill, a Bahamas-based fund is no longer required to appoint an investment fund administrator in the Bahamas to provide its principal office. Further, to act as an investment fund administrator, a firm must be licensed under the proposed bill or established and operating in a prescribed jurisdiction. Mr. Speaker, for those not familiar with financial services regulation, allow me to note that by prescribed jurisdiction, I mean a jurisdiction which the Commission has formally identified, that's the Securities Commission, has formally identified as having comparable regulatory standards and practices to our own, such that the Commission may rely on or defer to the other regulator in certain instances. I know the legislation also will not allow business structured as international business companies to be licensed as investment fund administrators and will subject the directors, officers, and senior managers to fitness and propriety standards. So you can't just be an IBC, it has to be a person. The investment fund administrator will also be required to appoint a compliance officer and must have 2 senior officers residing in the Bahamas to meet new physical presence requirements under the new bill. And of course, you know, physical or substance and physical presence is now a requirement of the substance bill that we passed last year as part of the overall EU package of bills. Mr. Speaker, proper oversight of the investment fund manager has been a glaring point of non-compliance under the current Act, compared against international standards and best practices for modern investment fund regulation. Under the new bill, all Bahamas-based investment funds must appoint an investment manager, except where investors are the fund managers themselves, the parent or subsidiary of the fund manager, or a feeder fund that invests 100% of its assets in a master fund. If the fund is being sold to accredited investors, then the fund manager would only need to be registered. But when selling to non-accredited investors, licensing would be required. So long as investment fund management services are being offered in or from the Bahamas, the investment fund manager would need to be licensed or registered under the proposed bill, regardless as to whether or not the fund is a Bahamas-based fund. Conversely, Bahamas-based funds will be free to appoint investment fund managers that are licensed or registered in prescribed jurisdictions. Licensed fund managers, of course, would be subject to capital and fitness and propriety requirements under the proposed legislation, closing regulatory gaps and contributing to protect investors and ensure fair and efficient markets. On the aspect of custodians, the bill also introduced a requirement that an investment fund appoints a custodian unless it has been exempted from the requirements by the regulator, that is the Securities Commission. Under the proposed legislation, the custodian will have to be independent of the investment fund administrator, the fund manager, and operator of the investment fund, and is obligated to segregate the cash and other assets of the fund from those of the custodian itself. Again, while addressing regulatory deficiencies, these provisions will bring about greater protection for investors. I note that the Securities Commission took measures to ensure these provisions would satisfy the regulatory principles for investment funds espoused by primary standard setters, the International Organization of Securities Commissions, or IOSCO. As part of the realignment of duties and responsibilities under the proposed legislation, the bill requires each fund to appoint operators. The required appointments are based on whether the fund is structured as a company, partnership, trust, or investment condominium. The responsibilities for the operation of the fund will be placed on those appointees, though in limited circumstances, certain fiduciary responsibilities will fall to the fund manager. The operators will, of course, be subject to fit and proper assessments, and generally will be required to be independent of the administrator unless exempted from this requirement or structured as an investment condominium. In creating the new bill, one of the primary objectives was to ensure that the legislative and regulatory framework it ushered in would not preclude Bahamian funds and investment managers from conducting business with the European Union. This means the legislation has to allow for compliance with the European Union's Alternative Investment Fund Managers Directive, which I will refer to as AFMED, or the directive. The directive entered into force on the 22nd of July 2011, creating a comprehensive and effective regulatory and supervisory framework for alternative investment fund managers within the European Union, as well as establish certain regulatory requirements for non-European Union alternative investment fund managers that provide services to EU investment funds. The AFMED also applies to non-EU alternative investment fund managers that manage or market in alternative investment funds in the European Union. The Securities Commission of the Bahamas has already engaged with and executed 28 memorandums of understanding with the securities regulators of EU member states in order to facilitate participation in their respective countries. The Commission advises it is working on concluding the memorandum of understanding with the Italian securities regulator, who is currently the final eligible securities regulator in the European Union. While the directive does not require that the non-EU country where an alternative investment fund is established must have AFMED equivalent rules, the non-EU alternative investment fund managers must be able and willing to operate in the EU in compliance with rules established in relation to the AFMED. Under the directive, non-EU alternative investment managers must seek a passport, and in this context, a passport means that once the rules are accepted by one EU country, then there's no requirements for you to duplicate that in the other EU member states. It's a passporting, you're accepted across, like a visa. Must seek a passport that would enable them to enjoy the same rights and be subject to the same obligations as their EU-based counterparts. It becomes a requirement for non-EU industry participants beginning in 2016. The draft bill is seeking to address the qualifications for EU passporting. As a result, the proposed legislation includes extensive AFMED provisions, which have been reviewed by a prominent UK law firm. Mr. Speaker, the investment fund industry is a vital component of the financial services industry in the Bahamas, and the jurisdiction's reputation as an international wealth management center. Investment funds provide business opportunities for persons seeking to invest fund products or investment funds-related services to clients locally and internationally. It provides a structure for new securities products for investors in the local capital markets. The investment fund industry has been the home of internationally notable innovations, such as the specific mandate alternative test, or SMART funds, and the investment condominiums, or the ICONs. However, for the many reasons already presented, the 2003 Act governing misses the mark on key regulatory provisions required to oversee the industry at current internationally acceptable levels, and the underlying investor protections and market conduct provisions they encapsulate as absent from the prevailing legislation. This bold piece of legislation seeks to fill those regulatory gaps with a framework of rationalized definitions of fundamental terms and the realignment of fundamentals through critical functions and responsibilities. It proposes to open the industry in key ways that will allow Bahamians greater access to international service providers to enhance their operations and client offerings. Simultaneously, it announces that Bahamian investment fund professionals and the industry are ready to compete internationally. It aims to ensure market access to both the investment products of other jurisdictions, such as the European Union, but also of those jurisdictions, the Bahamian markets. I note its rationalization of the responsibilities will also improve the ease of doing business in the sector and sets the foundation to attract new business, such as greater institutional business, as the responsibilities of investment fund administrators and managers, operators, and custodians are clarified. The Investment Fund Bill 2019, before us for debate, represents the introduction of a new chapter in Bahamian financial services. Its strong compliance with best practices and international standards, comprehensive and inclusive development process, and forward-looking approach to market growth and development promise that it is the right legislation to ensure this chapter is one in which the investment fund industry continues to flourish in the Bahamas. Mr. Speaker, I close just by saying that a lot of work has gone into the development of this piece of legislation, a lot of consultation by some very talented and innovative and creative Bahamians from all walks of life, all political stripes. And I want to thank all of them for the tremendous intellectual thought and work that has been put into this legislation. Mr. Speaker, much would have been spoken about the European Union, the legislation, the changes that we've had to implement in order to ensure that we remain compliant. This, included in this bill, are some provisions that came out of that consultation process that not only were required to be compliant with the new standards, but also identified areas where we can strengthen our competitive position. Again, taking advantage of the international standards for what may be considered would have been bad for us, and turning it around into a positive. And so again, Mr. Speaker, I commend this piece of legislation to the Parliament. Again, I do know that it is a technical bill, and it addresses a very narrow slice of even the financial services industry, but certainly of our economy. But it is nonetheless a very important piece of legislation, and one that will allow us to strengthen our product offering, give industry professionals additional alternatives to be able to offer their services not only locally, but internationally. I thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Honorable Member. Is there a seconder? The chair recognizes the Honorable Member for Yamacraw.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, let me first express gratitude on behalf of the good people of the Yamacraw constituency on being given this opportunity, Mr. Speaker, to second the debate on the Investment Funds Bill 2019. Mr. Speaker, when I was at university, one of my most favorite lecturers was Mr. Albert Piaggio, who taught administrative law. And he had the ability to take extremely complex issues, describe them in layman's terms, and I would always say, oh, that's what that is. And then take us through. And as I see Angliston, I remember her brother, who also had that God-given ability. But Mr. Speaker, before I go into my presentation, when I look at the investment fund bill, for those who are watching from home and here, I see I can put it in 3 sections, and this is how I intend to deal with it, Mr. Speaker, very briefly. And that is, you have persons who have funds, and the honorable member for East Grand Bahama defined, gave us the definition as in the Act for investment funds. So you have funds that you want to invest, and you want to invest those funds in an environment that is properly regulated, where your funds can be protected while protecting the good reputation of the industry and the country. The end result, Mr. Speaker, being profits. So at the end of the day, what we are discussing today, Mr. Speaker, and I stand to be corrected, is persons wanting to invest funds in a regulatory, controlled environment who want to protect the good reputation of the Bahamas. And as we know, the industry has grown, so there's international requirements that the good member for East Yamacraw outlined. There are some European principles that the bill ascribes to. And then at the end of the day, you want in that safe, secure environment, whether it be here in the Bahamas or abroad, to produce profits. Mr. Speaker, I crave your indulgence. Mr. Speaker, I crave your indulgence just to make a few short notices, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I would like, on behalf of the good and great constituency of Yamacraw, to express heartfelt condolences, Mr. Speaker, to the Honorable Melanie Griffin, former Member of Parliament for Yamacraw, Mr. Speaker. Her family has gone through a tumultuous period where she's lost 3 of her beloved family members. Mr. Speaker, it started with her mother, her sister, and then the Honorable Senator. And now, Mr. Speaker, she's just lost her brother. And Mr. Speaker, on behalf of my family, because she is from Cat Island, and I think that we are family, and on behalf of the great constituency of Yamacraw, I would like to take this opportunity to express profound gratitude to the Honorable Melanie Griffin and her family. Also, Mr. Speaker, I take this opportunity to extend condolences to Mr. David Roll on the passing of one of his relatives, Mr. Speaker. And that happened in a senseless act of violence. And so he supports me, and even if he did not support me, Mr. Speaker, I extend condolences to him. Mr. Speaker, I note that while we were here this morning, and as we celebrate International Women's Day, there was an icon sitting in the gallery in the person of Mrs. Ruby Ann Darlin. I think she was one of the first persons to vote or register, and I know that persons will help me with that, but she was here this morning. Pardon me? Thank you. The Minister of Education is living up to his reputation. Thank you, sir. So she was the first female to be granted the right to register. Thank you, sir. And she was here this morning, Mr. Speaker. But, Mr. Speaker, I would also like to recognize my grandmother, late Lucilla Dorset, my mother, and all my siblings, and the women of the Commonwealth of the Bahamas. Pardon me? My grandmother, Lucilla. And I also, yes. Mr. Speaker, I would also like to concur with the sentiments expressed by the Minister of Education in recognizing the former world champion, Mr. Bernard Hopkins. Boston is near and dear to my soul, and I quite recall telling the story of Mr. Leonard Boston Blackie Miller and his instructions to me in the evening when he took time out to train hundreds of Bahamian young boys. Mr. Speaker, before I go, just one last announcement. I've heard many things said about the Most Honorable Dr. Hubert Minnis, Mr. Speaker. At first they said he couldn't speak. I don't hear that anymore. No. But Mr. Speaker, one of the things I have come to appreciate about the minister-led administration is the opportunity for innovation. The opportunity to, because there's so much to be done in the community, Mr. Speaker, that no member of the government or persons in the society should be without having their hands to the plow to continue to build the Commonwealth of the Bahamas. And what I like about it, Mr. Speaker, is that when you identify projects to do in the community, he understands that leadership, Mr. Speaker, is about servitude, mentorship, and succession. And if you appreciate those concepts in leadership, Mr. Speaker, it allows you to find projects, and he doesn't get upset if you find what you perceive to be gold, and you speak to it. Mr. Speaker, we've started a project, and I made mention of it on the last occasion in this Honorable House, which is called the Yamakura Community Correctional Services Partnership. And this is done in many other countries, and sometimes the court has the opportunity on sentencing persons to allow them to do work in the community. And since the Bahamas Department of Corrections is right on the fringe, what we say in our community, because the community is so small, the Correctional Services Department is in every community. We decided to reach out through the Minister of National Security to the Commissioner and to say to them that we have a wealth of experience, talent, and resources in Yamakura, and we would like to share that with the facility. And we know from I was going to the prison or the correctional facility, sorry for saying that with Mr. Arthur Dion Hanna Jr., what I came to appreciate is that a whole lot of wealth, talent, and resource exists in the prison. So I want to say we reached out to them. We offered to assist them by way of clothing, retired persons going in to give speeches, funding or whatever have you, or however we can be a part of the rehabilitative process for the community. And so Mr. South Andres, there's a park just opposite your home. And we know that we identified that park, and half of that park is not cleared. And so you will see you may see, some of our friends, family members at that park, Mr. Speaker, and what they're allowing those persons to come, Mr. Speaker, and assist in cleaning the park. And how we shall reciprocate, Mr. Speaker, is by partnering with the Correctional Services Department and whatever resources that we can reasonably provide to that institution to assist those men and women in there, we shall do that. So it commences on Friday. So you will see members of the community there who partners with us, inmates, low-risk inmates from the correctional facility. They will be there, and we will provide food and whatever else that is necessary. And the objective, Mr. Speaker, the primary objective is rehabilitation. Studies have shown that where persons enter these types of programs, they can get jobs, they can be assisted, and if we cut down on recidivism, persons leaving the facility and they do not participate in anti-social activity anymore, then it protects the community. So the ultimate result, Mr. Speaker, is that. And so again, I want to commend Your Honorable Dr. Hubert Minnis. There are other projects that we have to come, and I would like to say to my colleagues, both on this side and opposite, that there's too much work to be done. Everybody can find something to do, and you may not get the recognition for it, because that ain't how life is. But there's a great commission, and sometimes action speaks louder than words, right? So I want to thank you, Mr. Speaker, for allowing me that opportunity. And now, Mr. Speaker, as I had indicated earlier, I will be very brief. What else? My cousin from Canada Island always laughs.
Don't worry about them.
As I indicated before, Mr. Speaker,
Stay on the wall. Don't come down. You're doing a good way.
the issue may be complex, but at the end of the day, all of the legislation we pass is designed to serve the Commonwealth of the Bahamas and the people of the Bahamas. So as I said before, when looking at the Investment Fund Bill 2019, there are funds that people want to invest. They want to do it in a regulated and secure environment, while at the same time protecting the good reputation of the Bahamas. And the end result, Mr. Speaker, is profits, the Investment Funds Bill. And after what the Honorable Member for East Grand Bahama said and what I just said, I should be able to take my seat. But what I shall do, Mr. Speaker, is take the Honorable House through some of the legislation, just to outline it just a bit, Mr. Speaker. Thank you. Mr. Speaker, from the objectives and reasons, the Investment Fund Bill 2018 is the result of intensive consultation on the part of the Securities Commission of the Commonwealth of the Bahamas to overhaul the regulatory regime for investment funds in the Bahamas, specifically by repealing and replacing the current Investment Funds Act to harmonize the law with international standards and best practices. And Mr. Speaker, I took the opportunity to speak with a number of persons in the industry, and what they said, it confirmed what the member for East Grand Bahama said, that there was wide and thorough consultation with this legislation, Mr. Speaker. The aim of the reform is to expand the scope of the power of the Securities Commission of the Bahamas in relation to the regulated persons and parties related in investment funds, to provide for measures to protect the investors, the public, and the reputation of the Bahamas, repeal and replace the act. And I want you to keep in mind when I go through, you will always hear the funds, protecting the funds, and at the end of the day, you will see the objective is to get profit. The bill contains 102 sections. The bill has 6 parts. Mr. Speaker, I'll now go and take you through some of the main features of the bill. And I do apologize if it sounds as if, because the bill is the bill, if I'm regurgitating some of what the deputy member for East Grand Bahama said. The key features of the bill is changes to the definition of Bahamas-based and non-Bahamas-based funds to clarify triggers for licensing. Another key feature is to provide the ability of funds to appoint international administrators who, without the requirements for licensing of the administrators in the Bahamas. Third, it introduces licensing requirements for fund managers and oversight of custodians. And again, as I said, you would see for the fund managers and the custodians, these are the people who are trying to regulate the industry. Number 4, it establishes a regulatory regime compliant with the standards established by the EU Administrative Investment Funds Management Directives. And as I said earlier, the industry has to recognize international standards, and one of the ways in doing this is to establish, by way of the EU, the European Union Alternative Investment Funds Management Directive, so that informs the bill. There are changes in definitions, and they are as follows. Carrying on business in and from the Bahamas now means to incorporate, register, or establish a fund in the Bahamas, to establish a unit trust where its governing law is the Bahamas, to operate as a fund license under the Act, to afford interest in a fund for sale to retail investors in the Bahamas, or to engage in investment funds business in the Bahamas as a fund manager, fund administrator, fund advisor, or alternate investment fund manager. And these are just persons engaged in the industry to ensure that there's transparency and the industry for those funds that you're investing are properly managed. There's also the definition of non-Bahamas-based funds. The investment fund definition is amended to remove specific nexus between fund and jurisdiction. For example, appointing an administrator or manager in the Bahamas. This gives ability to appoint international administrators without requiring that they be licensed in the Bahamas. The investment fund administrative regime. The bill removes the nexus of administration on being managed from consideration of Bahamas-based or replacing with activity. It removes connection of administration as basis for regulatory oversight. It changes the definition of principal office from place of business to address of regulated person. And finally, it refines duties of administrator, removing fiduciary duty, which are aligned between funds and manager and operator. The investment management regime. Mr. Speaker, the bill introduces standards for the regulation and monitoring of activities of funds managers. And I'll just go and deal with that just a little bit as we go on. The bill also mandates appointments of investment managers by Bahamas-based funds, except where investors are the fund managers, parent or subsidiaries, or is a feeder fund that invests 100% of the assets in the master fund. Oversight of custodians. The bill introduces regulatory oversight for custodians to ensure that only fit and proper persons, Mr. Speaker, are involved in the industry. It requires custodians to be independent of administrator, fund manager, and fund operator. And it requires custodians to segregate cash and other assets from the assets of the custodian. Mr. Speaker, in the bill, it specifically makes mention of the sharing of information, and so it requires at section 138 of the bill, Mr. Speaker, and I'll read it. Requires cooperation with other regulatory authority, and it says, the Commission may cooperate with any other regulatory authority in the Bahamas or elsewhere, including by sharing information that it has acquired in the course, by sharing information that it has acquired in the course of its duties or in the exercise of its functions under this or any other law, where it considers such cooperation or information may be relevant to the function of such other regulatory authority or as a necessary part of a framework for consolidated supervision, oversight, or regulation of the investment fund industry. And Mr. Speaker, what it does is while the Securities Commission, Mr. Speaker, seek to regulate matters within in the Bahamas, it also gives the Commission or the Security Commission the authority to cooperate with other regulatory industries for the purpose of safeguarding the funds, Mr. Speaker, and or protecting the reputation of the industry here in the Bahamas. Mr. Speaker, key to the bill is Part 5, which speaks to misconduct. And some of the misconduct outlined in the legislation, Mr. Speaker, is misleading or deceptive conduct, Mr. Speaker. A person must not engage in conduct in or from the Bahamas in relation to investment funds business that is misleading or deceptive or is likely to mislead or deceive. And Mr. Speaker, what I like about the bill is about the section is sufficiently wide enough to capture a number of activities that we've been dealing with recently. Mr. Speaker, what is that? Mr. Speaker, I had the opportunity recently, Mr. Speaker, to reread. We just passed, Mr. Speaker, the Substance Requirement Bill. Pardon me? Okay. And also what was most important about the bill is the guidelines on the Commercial Entities Substance Requirement Bill. I also took the opportunity, Mr. Speaker, to go over the OECD Secretary General report to the G20 leaders and what are now some of the international requirements for doing business, not just locally but internationally, Mr. Speaker. And so what the bill gives the Security Commission the authority to do who is the regulator. It gives it the authority to cooperate with international entities to ensure that there's no money laundering, there's no money laundering, there's no use of funds that may have been derived from trafficking in persons or from funds derived from the proliferation of weapons of mass destruction. Mr. Speaker, there's also a Section 140 misleading the Commission, and it requires persons in the industry, Mr. Speaker, to give full, frank, honest, and true information to the Commission while conducting the business to safeguard the industry. It says, a person must not, in compliance with any requirement imposed by or under investment funds law, knowingly or recklessly provide the Commission or the public with information that is false, that you don't want any insider trading, misleading in a material particular, or fails to state a fact that is required to be stated or that is necessary to make the statement not misleading. And there's 141 also speaks to false and misleading statements. And these sections, Mr. Speaker, are all designed to protect the good reputation of the Bahamas while we invite persons from around the globe to come to the Bahamas, bring their funds, and invest, but while at the same time adhering to international best practices. Dishonest conduct is also outlined, prohibited representation, making and then the act makes the misconduct an offense. Mr. Speaker, as I said when I started, the bill has about 102 sections. The whole objective, Mr. Speaker, with the bill is to allow investment funds and persons participating whether in the Bahamas or outside of the Bahamas to be able to deal with those funds, Mr. Speaker, in a transparent and honest manner. So at the end of the day, the good reputation of the industry, which is guarded and protected by the Securities Commission, could result in profits for the investors and for the Commonwealth of the Bahamas. Mr. Speaker, as I said earlier, I will not be long. I think having regard, I only have 5 more minutes left. Okay, so, but that's why I laugh. Having regard to the complexity of the legislation, what I can say after the professionals led by Ms. Christina Roll, who's here sitting in the gallery, and the Minister of Finance, after they would have done their, they have not, it is not would have, after they had done their due diligence with members of the industry guided by the Securities Commission, at this time thinks that this is the best legislation to be put to the people of the Bahamas at this time. I thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Honorable Member. Honorable members, it has been moved and seconded that the following bill be read for a second time and committed. A bill for an act to update the law relating to regulation of investment funds business to bring the law into harmony with international standards and best practices, to expand the scope of the powers of the Securities Commission of the Bahamas in relation to regulated persons and parties related to investment funds, to protect investors, the public, and the reputation of the Bahamas, to repeal and replace the Investment Fund Act, Chapter 369A, and for connected matters. As many, the Chair recognizes the Honourable Member for the Exomas and Ragged Island.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. I wish to reserve my place for presumably after lunch, Mr. Speaker, to offer my contribution.
Thank you. The Chair recognizes the Honourable Member for Bamboo Town.
Mr. Speaker, I do now move that the House suspends until 3 p.m. for our lunch break.
I second that, Mr. Speaker.
Honourable members, it has been moved and seconded that the business of this House do suspend until 3 p.m. this afternoon. As many as are in favour will remain seated. Those who oppose will stand. The business of this House stands suspended until 3 p.m. this afternoon.